The cold wind swept through the Hecate Strait, carrying the salty scent of the Pacific Ocean. In 2025, crab season had begun, and my boat, Sea Fury, was cutting through the waves toward this challenging stretch of ocean. This wasn't my first time facing rough seas and skin-piercing cold, but each season brings its own set of trials. The sky had yet to brighten as the roar of the diesel engine shattered the silence of Prince Rupert Island. Along with my 3 crew members, Mike, our cook and mechanic, Javier, a seasoned fisherman, and Danny, a rookie, we prepared for a 2-week journey at sea. After a final check, I looked at the sonar screen and asked, "Are the traps stacked? Bait ready? Everything set, guys?" Mike nodded, toying with an unlit cigarette. "All below deck, Captain. Just a little worried about the weather." I glanced at the forecast. Strong winds, waves up to 10 feet high, about 3 meters. Not ideal, but we didn't have a choice. Crab season only lasts a few weeks, and every day delayed is a missed chance to make a living. We dropped the first trap into waters 200 feet deep, roughly 60 meters, and the boat rocked violently. Javier laughed loudly, while Danny turned pale from seasickness. "Don't worry, you'll get used to it," Javier said. "But this sea, it swallows even the toughest guys." I stayed silent, focused on the job. Each trap was marked with a buoy. We'd return in 24 hours, hoping the sardine bait would lure in the giant crabs. The next day, the sea grew rougher. Huge waves slammed against the boat, icy seawater crashing onto the deck. Danny was throwing up, but still clung tightly to the lines. As we hauled up the traps, the first one surfaced heavy and full. We opened it to find a crab the size of a dinner plate thrashing inside, its claws glinting black. Mike shouted, "This one's gotta be at least 2 kilos!" But not every trap was so lucky. Some came up empty, others with just a few undersized crabs that didn't meet the standard. I sighed, but I wasn't discouraged. That's the life of a fisherman. Some days you hit big, other days you come up empty. On the 3rd night, the sky was clear. Javier sat on the deck, telling a story about the time he encountered a humpback whale in the Hecate Strait. Danny listened intently, his eyes shining in the headlights. "You'll see," Javier said, his voice full of experience. "This sea always has surprises." I looked out into the distance, the moonlight shimmering on the water. Even though the work was tough, this moment made everything worthwhile. 2 weeks flew by quickly. The hold was packed with fresh crabs, enough to pay off debts and survive the season, or as we called it, blood scent, the slang for fresh crabs. We returned to port, tired but satisfied. The ocean might be harsh, but it provides for us, and next year, Sea Fury would set sail again. Gliding through the Hecate Strait to hunt crabs, Sea Fury shuddered under the weight of the crammed crab bags. The salty smell of the sea mixed with the strong scent of fresh crabs, so familiar that we almost didn't notice it anymore. Javier sat on the deck, knees pulled up, scrolling on his phone despite no signal in the open sea. "I'll call my wife as soon as we dock," he muttered. "She's probably worried sick." Mike tightened the strap on the last crab bag. "She's used to it. 20 years at sea, never came back on time." I didn't respond, my eyes glued to the radar screen. A faint red line blinked in the east. It could be a school of fish, or an old shipwreck. The Hecate Strait is known for its deadly surprises. Tsunamis striking without warning, fog that obscures the path, and sudden currents that can sink a small boat in minutes. Suddenly, my heart raced. A thick rope, as wide as my wrist, was wrapped around the propeller, dragging a trap that weighed 100 pounds. If the rope got stuck, the propeller would break and we'd be stranded in the middle of the ocean. "Shut down the engine! Shut it off!" I rushed to the wheelhouse, but Javier was faster, yanking the throttle. The engine's noise stopped abruptly, and the boat drifted like a leaf on the waves. Mike and Danny struggled with the rope, their hands bleeding from the friction. With a sharp snap, the steel crab trap was torn apart and sank into the sea. Javier glared at me, eyes burning with anger. The kid didn't tie the rope properly. The whole trap's gone. Fortunately, the propeller wasn't severely damaged, but we lost a trap and the crabs inside. That night, Mike served beer and steamed crabs to reward the crew. The crab meat was sweet and white, dipped in melted garlic butter. For the first time on the trip, Danny ate heartily, showing no signs of seasickness. Javier patted him on the back, his voice gentle. "The seas taught you, huh? Next time, tie the rope tight." Through the wheelhouse window, I watched the waves shimmer under the moonlight. A fishing boat blinked a red light, like a lost star in the dark night. Tomorrow, we would return to port, sell the crabs, collect the money, and prepare for the next season. This cycle never ends. In late autumn, the sun in Prince Rupert rose late, and fog covered the water, making the ships look like ghosts. I inhaled the familiar scent of engine oil and rotting seaweed. The smell after every long trip. Danny sat at the corner of the dock, holding the phone he bought with his first paycheck. "Captain, I can't go on the next trip," she said, her voice full of regret. I nodded, not surprised. Last week, she had mentioned working at the boatyard. "The sea isn't for everyone," I said, looking toward the shore, where a flock of seagulls circled around the wreck of an old ship. "I gave up too." Danny lifted her orange plastic suitcase and smiled at her wife, waiting by the old truck. 20 years is enough. It was just Mike and me now. He stubbed out his cigarette in the water, the lighter flickering in the wind. This is really the end of the world. 2 weeks later, Sea Fury set out again, this time with only 2 crew members. I hired Tom, an unemployed fisherman from Newfoundland, his back slightly hunched from years of hauling nets. "Here's the deal," I said. "No smoking below deck, no drinking while working, and absolutely no setting traps when the waves are higher than 4 meters. I taped the rules to the wall in the wheelhouse. Tom grinned, showing his yellow teeth. "Sounds like boot camp, but it's up to the captain." The boat cut through the early morning fog, and the radar showed a small storm forming to the west of Hyde Bay. But we still headed into the strait. The crab season was at its peak, and every day of delay meant thousands of dollars lost. On the 3rd day, the waves began to get violent, towering like 2-story buildings, crashing into the hull. Cold water surged over the sides. Tom and Mike wrestled with the ropes in the rain, while I held onto the wheel, feeling the boat strain under the pressure of the waves. "We need to get out of here. Find a safe place," I shouted. From the engine room, there was a loud bang. Mike crawled out, his face smeared with oil. "The generator's down. We only have the main engine left." The radar screen flickered, then went completely dark. We were blind in the ocean, relying only on the compass and our experience. That night, the 3 of us didn't sleep. Mike moved back and forth through the engine room to keep the engine running. Tom watched the traps, while I steered the boat by instinct, trying to avoid being swallowed by the waves. Dawn arrived. The storm passed, and the sea was eerily calm, as if nothing had happened. 3 crab traps floated far off, their red blood spreading on the water's surface. Tom sank to the deck, his hands trembling as he lit a cigarette. I thought we were done for. I looked at the horizon, the sun rising. The 12 remaining traps were enough to make a living, enough to carry on. Back at port, the boat's hold was half full. Strangely, crabs were scarce this year, and the price skyrocketed. "Nice haul." The buyer clapped me on the back. "Last week, 2 boats disappeared in this strait." Mike decided to quit after the trip. "That's enough. I'm going home to my wife and kids," he said, his eyes red from exhaustion. As for me, I was negotiating to buy 5 new traps. Tom agreed to continue working. When the crab season came around again, Sea Fury would set sail once more, because the sea doesn't change, and those who live off it must learn to coexist with it. As the sun rose, Sea Fury cut through the waves, heading toward the best fishing grounds. The sky was leaden, the waves crashing violently. I turned up the radio, listening to the chatter from other boats. Zone 7A is full. Switch to 8C. A familiar captain's voice shouted angrily. Tom stood at the bow, holding the map, marked with a pen. Yesterday at Cape Big, we caught almost 2 tons. Let's try it. The first trap hit the water with a characteristic thud. I watched the depth gauge, 85 feet, about 26 meters, with a water temperature of 8 Celsius, perfect for giant crabs. The orange-painted steel traps sank into the sea, each buoy marked with its own color. 24 hours later, the engine's noise woke me from my restless sleep. Tom hauled the trap, the winch pulling the wet rope up onto the drum. "Hang in there, boys," he shouted as the first trap appeared, full of glistening blue-black crabs. I opened the trap, dozens of claws raised in threat. The smell of the sea and fresh crab meat hit my nose. Each crab was carefully measured with a specialized ruler. The ones with a carapace of at least 6.5 inches, about 16.5 centimeters, were tossed into the cold storage. The smaller ones were thrown back into the sea. My hands were scratched from the crab's claws. Tom's back ached from bending over to pick out the crabs, but the full crates made our efforts worthwhile. This was a battle with nature. 7 days later, the sea grew rough, with waves reaching 15 feet, about 4.5 meters, crashing against the boat, making work dangerous. One trap shook violently, nearly hitting Tom in the head. "We can't continue like this," he yelled into the wind. "We need to find shelter." But I knew that stopping now meant losing the whole trip. "Hold on, there are 20 traps left." We worked through the cold rain, our hands trembling as we gripped the struggling crabs. Blood from a small cut on my hand mixed with the salty seawater. When Sea Fury finally returned to port, the hold was filled with over 8 tons of crabs. Buyers crowded the dock, their eyes gleaming as they looked at the haul. "Come earlier next time." One man slapped me on the back. "Prices are going up every day." I nodded tiredly, rubbing my sore back, but my mind was already calculating the next trip. The endless cycle: drop the traps, haul the traps, sell the crabs, and head back out. Because out there, millions of giant crabs still crawled along the bottom of the Hecate Sea, waiting for our traps. After 3 days of rest on land, Sea Fury set sail again at dawn. This time, the hold was full of frozen sardines, ideal bait for the giant crabs. Tom stood at the stern, stuffing the traps with fish, the pungent smell hitting my nose. "We need to drop the traps deeper," I said, checking the line. "Other boats have already cleared the shallow areas." Tom nodded, tying the bait quickly. "I heard last week Sea Wolf caught crabs weighing 3 kilos at 120 meters. By noon, we had dropped 50 traps, their orange buoys bobbing on the waves, marking our positions. I recorded the coordinates carefully. Out here, one mistake could cost us everything. The next day, we discovered a strange boat inspecting our traps. Tom was furious. "That bastard is stealing our crabs." When the strange boat saw us approaching, it quickly sped off, but it was too late. 10 of our traps were gone, the lines cut. "Son of a bitch!" Tom slammed his fist against the side of the boat, furious, knowing that the whole day's work had been wasted. I calmly jotted down the boat's registration number in my blacklist. In these waters, trap piracy wasn't rare. There were always those who made a living by stealing others' traps. When we pulled up the 15th trap, we were both stunned. In addition to the familiar giant crabs, a young king crab was trapped inside. A species only found in cold waters. I checked the water temperature. 7 degrees, unusually cold for this time of year. Perhaps the current had carried this rare species south. I immediately changed our plan. "Tom, get the cod bait ready. Drop more traps into deeper water. In the next few hours, We worked frantically, dropping 30 specialized traps to a depth of 150 meters, each one equipped with a GPS marker to avoid losing them. The next morning, when we hauled in the first trap, my heart raced. 4 king crabs, as big as dinner plates, were struggling inside. Tom shouted, "We've hit the jackpot." That day, we caught 56 king crabs and 300 kilos of giant crabs. At the Prince Rupert Seafood Market, king crab prices hit a record, $150 per kilo. But the excitement didn't last long. When we pulled up the last trap, the winch suddenly stopped working. Tom cursed, and I realized the engine had overloaded from pulling up traps from such a deep depth. We had to haul the nearly 100-kilo trap by hand from a 150 meters down. As the trap surfaced, my hands were bloody from the rope. At the dock, buyers swarmed us like sharks. "Sell me the king crabs, I'll pay 10% over the market price." A buyer from Japan yelled. Tom and I exchanged a smile. This trip brought in nearly $500,000, 5 times the average income for a single trip. But in my mind, I was already calculating the next trip. King crabs didn't just show up by chance. The sea was changing, and we had to adapt. That night, I put down a deposit for 20 new king crab traps at the harbor bar. The king crab season had likely just begun. Before dawn, Sea Fury left the dock again, its hold filled with brand new king crab traps, ready to conquer the Hecate Strait.